This here is my prophecy against political authoritarianism and religious hypocrisy. It's 6 dates when there's going to be signs in nature, and 2 of the dates and their signs have already been. Today is Sunday 28th of January 2018. If you want to know what I mean when I talk about the hypocrisy, making a prophecy against the hypocrisy of American evangelical Christians, here's what I mean.
Evangelicals giving President Trump a pass on a porn star. The influential and powerful president of the Family Research Council says the religious right is giving the president a do-over for his past personal mistakes, including reports the president's lawyer created a private company to pay for a porn star's silence about an alleged affair with Trump. Earlier, I spoke with the man that made those comments, the president of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins. Let me try to understand. You used the exact word mulligan to talk about this, and obviously the most recent allegations involve an affair with a porn star that began a few months after his wife gave birth, the president's wife, and they also involve the president's personal attorney reportedly paying off the porn star for her silence. And you're saying you get a mulligan, you get a do-over here. I'm quoting you. Why?
Well, if this behavior were occurring today, right now, as he is President of the United States, I can assure you that my support and the support of evangelicals would be dissipating very rapidly. But we're talking about something that occurred 10 years ago. Among a number of things that occurred with this president prior to being president, and myself, along with a lot of evangelicals, were not supportive of him in the primary. In fact, I campaigned hard for one of his competitors, and it was when it was down to him and Hillary Clinton. He wanted to have the support of evangelicals, and he came to them saying, I'm going to pro-life justices. I'm picking a pro-life conservative running mate, and he embraced himself in the most conservative party platform ever. And yes, evangelicals, conservatives gave him a mulligan. They let him have a do-over. They said, we'll start afresh with you, and we'll give you a second chance. And there are people, evangelicals understand what a second chance means, and that's what that comment was made in the context of.
I want to ask you about the justices in a moment, because there's a point you made there that I think is really important. I want to understand better. But when you talk about a second chance, look, there's at least 15 women who say Trump harassed or assaulted them, and there is, of course, his own admission that he did these sorts of things. Here he is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the I can do anything.
Tony, a mulligan to golfers is one extra shot. How many do-overs will you give him?
Well, look, this was all before he became president and before he gained the support of evangelicals. I'm going to tell you right now, Aaron, evangelical support of the president is not unconditional. Let me be very clear about that. If this president were to engage in that behavior now that he was alleged and admitted in some cases to be involved in before, that support's not going to be there. But let me say this about this president. He has been actively involved in engaging with evangelicals since the general election. He's built a relationship with them. He's listened to them. He's surrounded himself with them. And more than any other president in my lifetime, he has been pursuing a conservative constitutional agenda that is in line with the values of evangelicals. But again, Aaron, let me be very, very, very clear here.
Yep.
That support is not unconditional. If the president stopped for some reason keeping campaign promises and then engaged in that behavior now, the support's gone.
Okay, I understand the point that you're making. I do want to understand that, because you brought up the pro-life justices, and now you're saying, right, but he's the most, conservative constitutional agenda, that he's pursuing that's what you support. You've said in the past, Tony, and I quote you, those of us who advocate for family values in the public square are held to a higher standard. The president is now in the public square. You are saying yourself that he is advocating for what you see as pro-family policies via pro-life and a conservative agenda. Why not hold him to the same standard that you seem to hold for yourself?
He is being held to the standard now. He is being held to that standard now. He is not doing these things now. If he does, if he were to engage in this alleged behavior now, the support is not going to be there. And I'll be the first to say that. But this is stuff that is coming up now, and we heard all of this during the campaign. And again, evangelicals were not there at the beginning. It was only when they had a choice between Hillary Clinton, who is an anathema when it comes to her policies to them, and a guy who said, I'm going to champion things you care about. I want a second chance. I want to do the right thing. And let me tell you what, Aaron, to date, he's doing the right thing. And he has our support.
What about the hush money the Wall Street Journal has reported was paid? That was paid, of course, after you were supporting him. It was paid right before the election. It was paid to silence the porn star for this alleged affair.
We'll see what comes of that. I don't know anything about that other than what I've heard. And look, this president, everything he does, good or bad, is attacked. But I'm going to tell you about the policies that we're watching. He's moved the embassy of Israel to Jerusalem, something that Republican and Democrat presidents for the last 2 decades were afraid to do, even though it was stated law. He has ordered the Department of Justice to make sure every federal agency is respecting religious freedom. He has embraced a solid pro-life agenda. And as long as the president continues to keep his promises and he continues to conduct himself as he has that I'm aware of, then he is going to continue to have support of evangelicals. But it's conditioned upon that.
What about what he said about African countries when he called them assholes? As an evangelical Christian, are you okay with that? That racist comment?
Look, he's not the first president to use colorful language. I don't know that I would put that in the context of racial language, but I would not describe.
He says, "I don't want people from those assholes, African countries coming to the U.S." You don't find that racist?
I cannot endorse everything the president says. I know that there's a lot of evangelicals. In fact, I spoke to many on my radio today who called in and said, you know what, I'm with the president. I wish he wouldn't tweet some of the things he does. I wish he wouldn't say things the way he does. But when I look at what he has done, I support him. And I put myself in that same category.
How do you deal with what is such a crucial question for many people in this country, many of whom may support Donald Trump or consider supporting Donald Trump? And that is, he's the president of the United States. You have 5 children, I believe. Am I right? 5 children, Tony?
I do, yeah, I do.
So the president of the United States is on talking about S-holes or grabbing women's peas or all these things that your children have had to hear. Is he a role model for your children? What do you tell them?
No, my children have a role model. I'm their role model. And we have conversations about what the president says. And be clear, some of those things you just stated were before he was president.
But he still said them. They're part of who he is and his character. He's 71 years old, right?
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. But he has said, I'm going to do things differently. And to the degree that he is doing those things differently now, he has our support. Look, evangelicals, Aaron, this is something people need to understand about evangelicals. We understand grace. We understand forgiveness. We understand that we've all got a past. And he has said, I want to do it differently. I want to do it better. And he is surrounding himself with those people that can help him, encourage him to do the right thing. And so we understand grace. We've all received it. Those who are evangelicals receive grace from God through Jesus Christ. And so we can have that mercy. Now, again, Aaron, let me be very clear. If the president were to continue to engage in behavior that's alleged to have happened 10 years ago, that support's not going to be there. It's only because he says, I want a second chance. And I'm thankful I got a second chance. And I would pray that others would seek a second chance by changing and doing the right thing.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate your time.
All right, Aaron. Great to be with you.
And next, Jamie Duckworth speaking out tonight. She's going.
Interesting. Grace. We understand grace. We understand forgiveness. And I know that is the language of the Evangelical Christians and the Pentecostals, because I did actually join a Pentecostal church in Canberra, and that was around 2004, early 2004, and I didn't stay in the church long because I was really hungry to learn at that time. I'd just come out of the closet in regards to being gay, and I was hungry to explore everything. I read the entire New Testament from cover to cover, and I enjoyed reading it. I also read some of the Quran, and I read some of the Hindu holy book, which I forget the name of it now, but also the Buddhist holy books. I read everything. I didn't read it all, but I read most of the holy books, the world's big and great holy texts of the major religions. I read them. And I mentioned to the pastor at the Evangelical Church that I had joined in Canberra, Pentecostal church. I mentioned that I was reading a few other holy books as well, and he looked at me and he said, you're one of those. And that single comment and the way he said it, I knew straight away, this is not a place for me. There was so much judgment in those few words, and so much rejection in those words. You're one of those. And yeah, I am one of those. I don't just hold up one holy book, namely the Bible, and say this is the exact word of God that you cannot question. I don't do that, because I don't believe it is the exact word of God. And I think it's the duty of every spiritual-minded person to question very much what they're reading and whether or not it's good or bad. Because there's a lot of stuff in the Bible, including the New Testament, that is not good, that is very bad. There's a lot of stuff aimed at controlling people, making people feel guilty, making people feel guilty in a bad way. There's such a thing as guilt that is reasonable, but guilt that is destructive, that guilt that just traps people, that's been used for centuries to have power over people, guilt trip them into obedience. And no, I don't accept all of the Bible by any means. Not at all. I still am a Christian, but I don't go around calling myself a Christian because there's too many people like, look at Australia, Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, Peter Dutton, now the Minister for Home Affairs. He's a lot like Donald Trump. He disparages people from various parts of the world. Donald Trump, it's not even a couple of weeks yet since he said in a meeting on immigration, why do we have to have all these people from shithole countries? That was the language he used. He didn't just say it once, he said it several times, according to several of the people who were at that meeting. He now denies it. Denies it in writing to 40 African leaders. This here is a prophecy. It's a prophecy against the hypocrisy of organized religion, and it's a prophecy against political authoritarianism. The type that is on display right now in Russia, with Vladimir Putin and the Orthodox Christian Church in Russia, who are, I might add, about as homophobic as you can get. They couldn't even resist making a statement about how the world is probably going to end soon, immediately after Australia's people voted to allow same-sex marriage. That was the leader of the Orthodox Church in Russia, who is a big supporter of Vladimir Putin, who is a dictator. The election that they're having in Russia right now is a sham, a complete joke. It's not a real election. And it's backed up by religious hypocrites, the Orthodox Christian Church. The idea of collusion between Russia and America doesn't strike me as at all hard to believe, given that you've got religious hypocrites in both places, wanting to have control over people, both willing to use propaganda, and use propaganda in a big way, while calling everyone else, like CNN, the fake news people. Really. I mean, it's a few months now, going on 5 months, since it was reported that the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar were being murdered. And when I say murdered, I mean butchered, slaughtered. UN and Amnesty International said this is a clear case of ethnic cleansing. It's textbook ethnic cleansing. At least 6,000 people killed. That's why 100,000 Rohingya Muslims have fled. So when these people claim to care about religious freedom, they obviously don't give a crap about the religious freedom of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, because Donald Trump gave an address to the UN the very week that all the news was breaking, not just on CNN, but on every main news channel. There were eyewitnesses coming forward and saying, they tore my little baby boy out of my arms and threw him into a fire. I saw him burn to death. Then they raped me. They were raped by not just one, but several soldiers who killed other members of their family, shot them. And you wonder why they fled Myanmar. Not just one eyewitness. Dozens upon dozens of eyewitnesses telling that exact horror story of having their baby boys torn from their arms and thrown into fires to burn alive. This is what I call hypocrisy to the extreme. Donald Trump gave an address to the UN. He said we may have to totally destroy North Korea. He went on to talk about Iran, Venezuela, and a few other nations that he regards as being Yemen, and a few other nations that he regards as being a threat to freedom, and a threat to world peace, and a threat to decency, and a threat to this, and a threat to that. He never mentioned Myanmar at all. He never mentioned the plight of the Rohingya Muslims, because like Australia's Peter Dutton, head of Home Affairs now, Donald Trump's very keen to paint people from certain places as terrorists, even if they're the victims of terrorists, even if they're the victims of slaughter, victims of war crimes. They dismiss them as terrorists and ignore it. And Australia's entire government has ignored what happened to the Rohingya Muslims completely. I haven't heard a single Australian politician comment on the plight of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Not one. Not one. Not in government, not in opposition. And Peter Dutton is actually a very powerful politician in Australia. I know how he thinks. I know what his attitude is towards people who come from certain countries and people who are of certain skin colour, perhaps, and certainly people of certain religion, namely Muslims. I know his attitude. I've seen it. I've observed it. And I find it disgusting and reprehensible. And I can see why some people refer to Peter Dutton as Australia's little Trump. And I want to make it very clear that this is a prophecy backed up by Jacob Wetterling, who was the victim of a closeted sexual predator in Minnesota back in 1989. A guy named Danny Heinrich, who it turned out when the police and FBI raided his home in 2016, he had a big portrait of Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler in his house. He had a Christian Bible from which he'd torn a page and underlined something about forgiveness. Mercy. I'm sorry, but there's some things that can't be easily forgiven. Not easily. Murdering an 11-year-old boy is a pretty bad thing. But what about the people that force gay people, who have forced gay people, historically, homosexuals, to live in the closet and to live in guilt, entrapped? Don't they have a part to answer for? When little boys are murdered by closeted sexual predators like Danny Heinrich. Danny Heinrich himself was the victim of a sexual predator as an adolescent. Different argument, but that's Jacob. Nathan Breeze, 13-year-old from Victoria in Australia. He died in the Black Saturday bushfires. In the wake of Black Saturday, Australia's government decided, the opposition at the time, which was the coalition, the Liberal Party, under Tony Abbott, said that climate change, global warming, was a joke. a joke. Climate science was a hoax. And Nathan and Jacob are the two boys that are behind me in this prophecy. This date here, Wednesday 7th of February, will be the 9th anniversary of the bushfire in which Nathan died. He was 13 years old. It was Black Saturday, the 7th of February. 9 years later, it's Wednesday, the 7th of February. This date here is the anniversary of Ash Wednesday, another bushfire disaster in Australia's history. But it falls on a Friday. And the anniversary of Black Friday, the 13th of January, fell on a Saturday. So that's interesting. And this date here, Friday 9th of March 2018, well, that's the birthday of my best friend. And it's kind of interesting because my best friend, I would have been with him, except my partner visa with him was rejected by Immigration and Border Protection. And he's from India, which is not that far from Bangladesh. And he's quite dark because he's from southern India. And not that far from Bangladesh, adjoining nations. Myanmar joins to Bangladesh. It's on the other side. India, a country that is suffering pretty badly from climate change, from global warming. The temperatures they've had there in recent years just defy belief. Australia's had some bad heat this year, despite the fact that it's a La Nina year, not an El Nino year. We've still had heat waves that have broken records. Penrith had its second hottest day on record on the 7th of January. This is a prophecy against hypocrisy and against authoritarianism. And it's overdue. I'll show you something else. There's a couple of ads here, and then I'll show you something else. Also in relation to my partner, this is all the tropical cyclone names. Or the guy who would have been my partner, had our partner visa application been processed. Our waiting time, the estimated waiting time for our application went from 6 months, then to 12 months, ended up 15 months, and then they just rejected and didn't even notify me that they had rejected. So I know firsthand just how unscrupulous and bad Immigration and Border Protection are in Australia. And I know what their attitude is towards people of different skin colour, people from a certain nation, whatever it is. They did not fairly process our partner visa application. And I had a counsellor actually said to me that in his estimation, they may not want people, dark people, black people coming to Australia. He was talking about this particular current government, federal government of Australia. And I thought, no, that can't be true. I actually think he was right. And if I go back to when I was a member of an evangelical church back in 2004, I was working for Foxtel at a Foxtel kiosk in the Woden Plaza in Canberra. And I had a guy come up to me one day. The news was on the TV, and it was about Hurricane Rita, which was approaching Texas. And he came up to me and he said, "Do you know why that hurricane never hit Houston?" And I said, "No." He said, "There's no black people in Houston." And I was just astounded that someone could come up and say something so blatantly racist. But he then went on to say, "I'm not a racist. Let me explain." He went on to explain that in the Bible, God makes a pact with the Jews. He makes a pact with white people. It's a pact that involves protection. And he went on to say that black people don't have that protection. And I could not believe what I was hearing, but I did hear it. And he was ignorant, of course. There are quite a few black people in Houston. And Houston got smashed by Hurricane Harvey last year. So that proved his belief completely wrong. But in relation to my partner, he was born on a Saturday. If you add up all the letters according to their place in the alphabet of all these names and the word "and" to join the last two. So D is 4, A is 1, and so on. Add them all up, they equal 741. Dahlia was named by Indonesia, a poor country, a poor Asian country full of dark-skinned people, I might add. Dahlia. And a country that Australia likes to pass the buck when it comes to border protection, asylum seekers, refugees. It's blame Indonesia. It's blame a poor country for the boats. Dahlia. Actually, it's inequality. Inequality and war crimes. That's why you have refugees. That's why you have desperate people dying, whether at sea or in a refugee camp in Bangladesh, waiting for monsoonal rains to come and potentially wash them away into the sea. That's what could happen. Because rain is getting, extreme flooding rains are getting worse. Extreme mega fires, bushfires like the one that killed Nathan Breeze, they're happening more often. Cape Town in South Africa, they're running out of water. Did you know that? They've got less than 3 months of water left. Well, my partner, my would-be partner, my best friend, he was born on a Saturday and he's turning 27. And if you start a countdown on Saturday the 27th of February 2016, which was a really bad year for us because we were forcibly separated from each other by the Australian government, this Australian government. The government, whether it's Tony Abbott or Malcolm Turnbull, probably doesn't make a lot of difference. Peter Dutton was the head of Immigration and Border Protection, and that, I think, did make a lot of difference. Before him, it was Scott Morrison. Changed to Peter Dutton just after we lodged our application. Our waiting time, estimated processing time, went from 6 months to 12 months to 15 months. Then outright rejection of our application and no notification sent to me at all. I went to the second half of last year not knowing what the outcome of the application was. When I called immigration in December, they said, "You'll have to contact your partner. We can't give you this information because of privacy." They are disgusting. They are the worst department. And this is what I mean when I say I'm making a prophecy against authoritarian governments, bullies, people who like to inflict suffering on people for no reason whatsoever other than because they can. So the tropical cyclone names that are underlined are the ones that haven't happened yet. The next one will be Kelvin, then Linda, then Marcus, Nora, Owen, Penny, Riley, and Savannah. Penny was also the name of a girl who died on Black Saturday in those bushfires. Penny and Melanie Chambers also died at King Lake, which is where Nathan Breeze died, with his older sister Amy, his younger sister Tegan, his mother Tina, and 169 other people died that day. Racism's not okay. And the reason in this ad I'm about to play, the reason they don't come right out and say that they threw kids into fires is because it's too horrible to say it over and over again. But that is what happened. They threw kids into fires and let them burn to death. And Donald Trump never mentioned this in his address to the UN when it was fresh on the news, what he calls the fake news.
How many times have we said never again after Bosnia, after Rwanda, yet we find ourselves talking about people being persecuted, people being murdered, people being pushed out of their homeland? They were telling us horror stories about seeing their villages set on fire, being smoked out of their own homes, shot at as they ran.
It is one of the most profound cases of injustice that there is.